Namaskar, Main Ravish Kumar. The calendar on the wall says 2025. But the news headlines feel like they are from a much older, darker time. Look around you. A sense of unease hangs in the air. It is a feeling that something is fundamentally broken. The world today seems to be teetering on a precipice. We are living through a period of intense turmoil. Every day brings news of a new crisis, a new conflict, a new tragedy. From the battlefields of the Middle East to the disaster sites in our own country, the story is the same. It is a story of instability, fear, and uncertainty. We are told we live in an age of progress. But is this what progress looks like? The year 2025 has already etched itself into our collective memory for all the wrong reasons. It began with tremors of war and has continued with a relentless series of disasters. The conflict between Iran and Israel has escalated, pulling the entire region into a vortex of violence. The world watches, holding its breath, as diplomatic channels fray and the rhetoric of war grows louder. Here at home, the nation has been rocked by one tragedy after another. The horrific plane crash in Ahmedabad, the deadly stampede at the Mahakumbh, the terrorist attack in Pahalgam. Each event is a stark reminder of our vulnerability. These are not just news stories. They are deep wounds on the national psyche. This constant barrage of bad news has a numbing effect. We wake up, check our phones, and are greeted by headlines of death and destruction. We have become accustomed to this diet of despair. But we must ask ourselves, is this normal? Should we accept this as the new reality? The fabric of global stability, so carefully woven over decades, appears to be unraveling at an alarming speed. International institutions seem powerless. Treaties and agreements are being discarded. The language of cooperation is being replaced by the logic of confrontation. The world feels more fragmented, more dangerous than it has in a very long time. This atmosphere of perpetual crisis is not just a matter for politicians and generals. It affects ordinary people in profound ways. It creates a deep-seated anxiety about the future. Parents worry about the world their children will inherit. Young people see their dreams overshadowed by global uncertainty. The economy sputters, prices rise, and the burden on the common person increases. This is the reality of 2025. It is a year defined by conflict, disaster, and a pervasive sense of dread. A year that forces us to look back and wonder if we have seen this all before. Is history repeating itself? Let us turn the pages of history back to 1941. It was a year that stood at the heart of the 20th century's greatest catastrophe. The world was engulfed in the flames of the Second World War. The conflict was not a distant affair fought in isolated pockets. It was a total war, a global conflagration that spared no continent. Nations were locked in a struggle for survival. Ideologies clashed with terrifying violence. The scale of the fighting was unprecedented. Millions were mobilized, economies were transformed into war machines, and entire cities were reduced to rubble. The year 1941 was a critical turning point in this devastating conflict. The headlines of 1941 were dominated by battles and betrayals. In May, the pride of the German Navy, the battleship Bismarck, was sunk in the Atlantic after a dramatic chase. This was a significant victory for the Allies, but it was just one episode in a relentless naval war. On the Eastern Front, Hitler launched Operation Barbarossa, a massive invasion of the Soviet Union. This opened up a new brutal chapter of the war, leading to unimaginable suffering and millions of casualties. The very foundations of civilization seemed to be crumbling under the weight of this global conflict. The world was living on a knife's edge, with the future of humanity hanging in the balance. The economic landscape of 1941 was also bleak. The world was still reeling from the effects of the Great Depression. While the war effort stimulated industrial production in some countries, it came at a tremendous cost. Resources were diverted to the military, leading to shortages of essential goods for civilians. Rationing was commonplace, economies were distorted, and the specter of debt loomed large over nations. The global economic system was in a state of collapse. International trade was disrupted by U-boat wolf packs and naval blockades. The world was not only politically divided, but also economically shattered. The year culminated in an event that would change the course of the war. On December 7, 1941, Japan launched a surprise attack on the US naval base at Pearl Harbor. This act of aggression brought the United States, a sleeping giant, into the war. The conflict, which had been largely centered in Europe and Asia, now became a truly global war. Pearl Harbor was a moment of profound shock and trauma. It demonstrated the fragility of peace and the suddenness with which a nation could be plunged into war. 1941 was a year of unceasing violence, economic hardship, and collapsing global order. A year when humanity seemed to have lost its way. While the world was at war in 1941, India was fighting its own battles. The struggle for independence from British rule was at a critical juncture. The political atmosphere was charged with tension. Leaders like Mahatma Gandhi, Jawaharlal Nehru, and Subhas Chandra Bose were navigating a complex path. The Indian National Congress was demanding complete independence, while the British were focused on the war effort. This created a deep political rift. Indians were being asked to fight in a war for a freedom they themselves did not possess. This contradiction lay at the heart of the Indian experience in 1941. The nation was yearning for freedom while being shackled by a colonial power. Fast forward to 2025. India is a sovereign, independent nation, but it is facing a different set of trials. The year has been marked by a series of heart-wrenching tragedies. In January, the country was stunned by the news of a commercial airliner crashing near Ahmedabad. The loss of life was immense, and the incident raised serious questions about aviation safety and infrastructure. It was a national tragedy that united the country in grief. The images from the crash site were a grim reminder of the fragility of life. For days, the nation watched as rescue teams worked tirelessly, hoping against hope. The crash left a deep scar on the public consciousness. The grief from the Ahmedabad crash had barely subsided when another disaster struck. During the Mahakumbh, one of the largest religious gatherings on earth, a deadly stampede occurred. In the midst of a sacred ritual, chaos erupted, leading to a tragic loss of life. The incident exposed the challenges of managing massive crowds and the need for better disaster preparedness. It was a moment of profound sadness, turning a festival of faith into a scene of mourning. Questions were asked in Parliament. Inquiries were launched. But for the families who lost their loved ones, the pain was immeasurable. The event highlighted the immense pressures on India's public infrastructure. As if these tragedies were not enough, the spectre of terrorism returned to haunt the nation. A brutal attack on pilgrims in Pahalgam, Kashmir, sent shockwaves across the country. This cowardly act of violence was a deliberate attempt to disrupt peace and create fear. It was a painful reminder that the threat of terrorism remains real and potent. The attack was condemned across the political spectrum, and security forces launched a massive operation. But the incident once again brought the complex issue of Kashmir to the forefront of the national debate. In 2025, just as in 1941, India finds itself grappling with immense challenges, both internal and external. So, comparing 1941 and 2025 reveals some startling parallels in the realm of global conflict. In 1941, the world was divided into two major blocs, the Axis powers and the Allies. This division created a clear, albeit terrifying, geopolitical landscape. Nations were forced to choose sides. Neutrality was a difficult, often impossible position to maintain. The conflict was driven by expansionist ambitions, ideological fervor, and a breakdown of diplomatic norms. The League of Nations, the predecessor to the UN, had failed to prevent the slide into war. The world was, a chessboard where great powers moved their pieces with little regard for the consequences for smaller nations. Today, in 2025, we see a similar, though more complex fragmentation of the global order. The world is increasingly being divided into competing blocs. The rivalry between the United States and its allies on one side, and a coalition of nations like China and Russia on the other, is intensifying. This new Cold War is being fought on multiple fronts: economic, technological, and military. The war between Iran and Israel is a prime example of this dynamic. It is not just a regional conflict. It is a proxy war involving global powers, each with its own strategic interests. Just like in 1941, the machinery of international diplomacy seems to be failing. The United Nations struggles to enforce its resolutions. The social and psychological impact on ordinary citizens, also shows a striking resemblance. In 1941, people lived with the constant fear of air raids, invasions, and the dreaded telegram informing them of a loved one's death. The war permeated every aspect of daily life. Propaganda filled the airwaves and newspapers, shaping public opinion and demonizing the enemy. A sense of collective anxiety and patriotic fervor gripped nations. This constant stress took a heavy toll on the mental health of the population. The future was uncertain, and survival was the primary concern for millions of people across the globe. In 2025, the nature of the threat has evolved, but the psychological impact is similar. Instead of air raid sirens, we have the constant ping of news alerts on our phones, delivering a steady stream of bad news. The war in the Middle East, the terrorist attacks, the disasters, all contribute to a pervasive sense of anxiety. We are living in an age of information overload, where graphic images of conflict and suffering are just a click away. This creates a feeling of helplessness and vicarious trauma. The political polarization, amplified by social media, mirrors the propaganda of the past. People feel divided, angry, and fearful about the future, much like their counterparts in 1941. So we arrive at the final crucial question. Is history truly repeating itself? Are the events of 2025 merely a replay of 1941? The parallels are undeniable and deeply unsettling. The rise of aggressive nationalism, the breakdown of international cooperation, the eruption of major conflicts, and the pervasive sense of global instability, all these are echoes from the past. The tragedies in India, from the Ahmedabad crash to the Pahalgam attack, remind us that even as a major global power, we are not immune to crisis and suffering. The human cost of these events, whether in 1941 or 2025, is measured in grief, loss, and shattered lives. However, to say that history is simply repeating itself would be an oversimplification. The context has changed dramatically. In 1941, the world was dealing with empires and colonialism. Today we face challenges like climate change, cyber warfare, and the threat of non-state actors. The technology of war is far more advanced and destructive. The existence of nuclear weapons adds a terrifying dimension that was not present in the same way in 1941. Our world is more interconnected than ever before. A conflict in one region can have immediate and far-reaching consequences for the global economy and supply chains. The players are different, and the rules of the game have changed. Perhaps it is more accurate to say that history does not repeat, but it rhymes. The specific events are different, but the underlying human behaviors are the same. The lust for power, the appeal of extremist ideologies, the fear of the other, and the failure of leaders to choose peace over conflict, these are timeless themes. We see the same patterns of hubris and miscalculation that led to catastrophic wars in the past. We see the same tendency to ignore warning signs until it is too late. The tragedies of 2025 serve as a powerful reminder that the lessons of history are often forgotten. Ultimately, whether the future will be a tragic echo of the past is not predetermined. It is a choice. The story of 1941 is a warning. It shows us the abyss into which humanity can fall when diplomacy fails and aggression goes unchecked. The events of 2025 are a wake-up call. They compel us to look in the mirror and ask if we are on the same path. The future is not yet written. We have the knowledge of the past to guide us. The question is whether we will have the wisdom to use it, or are we doomed to listen to the same broken record, playing the same sad song of conflict and tragedy over and over again? The answer lies in our collective hands. Namaskar.